If you strip World War II survival down to its rawest truth, it wasn't firepower that kept soldiers alive between battles. It was shelter. Cold, rain and mud killed quietly and relentlessly. Hypothermia, trench foot, exhaustion and exposure claimed more men than enemy fire in some campaigns. Standard-issue tents often failed, collapsed or were abandoned under fire. So, soldiers adapted. They borrowed techniques from loggers, nomads, hunters and civilians, turning scraps, terrain and discipline into shelters that worked when nothing else did. These weren't clever tricks, they were survival necessities, and they still matter today. Before we go any further, if this kind of forgotten, field-tested survival knowledge matters to you, just take a second to subscribe to Survival Stories. These are lessons written in hardship, not theory. Modern outdoor gear assumes predictability. World War II soldiers had none. They couldn't count on dry ground, steady weather, or even the chance to stay in one place overnight. Shelter had to be fast, low profile, repairable, and adaptable. The priority wasn't comfort. It was staying dry, blocking wind, and preserving body heat. Soldiers learned that a bad shelter drained energy faster than hunger ever could. Every hack you're about to hear comes from that mindset. One of the earliest lessons soldiers learned was that cold rises from the ground faster than it falls from the sky. Men who slept directly on soil or snow rarely lasted the night without injury. Field manuals and veteran accounts describe improvised ground layers made from pine boughs, straw, brush, empty ration boxes, even dismantled fence rails. The rule was simple. Anything was better than nothing. To apply this today, you prioritize separation from the ground first. A raised bed of branches under a tarp will outperform a thick sleeping bag placed directly on frozen soil. In snow, rain and high wind, soldiers often dug shallow depressions rather than building exposed shelters. Earth is insulation. A trench cut just deep enough to block wind could raise the internal temperature dramatically. Snow shelters, especially in Eastern Front conditions, used compacted snow walls that hardened overnight. The same principle works today. If the environment allows, using terrain to block wind reduces heat loss more effectively than piling on layers. WWII ponchos weren't just rain gear. Soldiers actually rigged them into lean-tos, ground covers, windbreaks and even snow roofs. The key wasn't really the fabric, but the angles. Sloped surfaces shed rain, and low profiles resisted wind. When paired with branches or rifles used as supports, ponchos created fast shelters that could be rebuilt again and again. Modern equivalents include tarps, but the lesson remains the same. Shelter shape matters more than material. One mistake inexperienced soldiers made was sealing shelters too tightly. Moisture buildup soaked clothing and bedding overnight. Veterans learned to leave small ventilation gaps, even in freezing conditions. Dry cold was survivable. Damp cold was deadly. Today, this principle applies directly to tarp shelters and emergency bivouacs. Always allow moisture to escape, even if it feels, counterintuitive. In Italy and Western Europe, mud was often worse than snow. Soldiers elevated sleeping areas using logs, rubble, or overturned equipment. They cut shallow drainage channels to divert water away from shelters. These small efforts prevented boots and bedding from soaking overnight. In modern survival situations, even a few inches of elevation can mean the difference between dry rest and hypothermia. Soldiers often slept in close formation inside shelters, not for comfort, but for survival. Shared body heat reduced exposure and conserved calories. Blankets, ponchos and coats were layered collectively rather than individually. This principle still applies in group survival scenarios. Heat management is more efficient when resources are pooled intelligently. Shelters were often disguised using natural materials not just to avoid detection, but to stabilize temperature. Mud, snow and vegetation added mass and reduced heat loss. A shelter that blended into its environment also resisted wind better. Today, adding natural insulation to a tarp or lean-to can significantly improve performance without extra gear. None of these techniques rely on modern technology. They rely on understanding heat transfer, moisture, airflow, and terrain. Those rules haven't changed in centuries. Whether you're dealing with a power outage, a winter emergency, or a backcountry survival scenario, WWII shelter logic remains brutally effective. If you value survival knowledge earned the hard way, subscribe to Survival Stories, share this episode with fellow history buffs, and keep these lessons alive. Because the weather hasn't gotten kinder, and history still has plenty to teach us.